So in this demo, we're going to go through some of the relatively new time tools that are available in ArcGIS. We're going to work mostly with vector data, so points and polygons in this case, though I'm going to include some information on how to visualize raster-based temporal data as well. This is in the netcdf format, and we're going to go over this right at the end a little bit. So the first thing you want to do is go ahead and look in the folder that you should have downloaded, and you'll see that there's quite a lot of stuff. You've got a few different shape files, borders, Indiana Public Schools, U.S. fires, U.S. historical states, and then one kind of weird little NC file in here that's relatively big. This is that netcdf file, so we'll deal with this later on. Don't expect it to show up in ArcGIS without some tweaking. So go ahead and start a new blank map document if you hadn't. And we're going to start off with looking at historical state boundaries in the U.S. So go ahead and choose Add Data. Again, if you need a refresher on how to map to particular folders, then look at one of the earlier demonstrations. But go ahead and add in U.S. historical states here. So what you very quickly probably notice is that's rendering, is that there's lots of overlaps in here. I'm just switching back to my layer mode here. It's a good idea to stay on that, especially if you're going to have just raster or just vector data in. When I open up the attribute table here, what you probably notice is that we have multiple records for each state. These are whenever the boundaries changed, whenever the borders changed. So in this case, Alabama changed a little bit at various points. And it has a description on it. So these are from the National Historic GIS database, and there are links available to these data throughout the demo and lecture. So what we want to be able to do here is have this start and end date mean something for us. At the moment, it's a little bit difficult to see anything, even if we try to get some information about a particular space or a particular state. You can see that we hit quite a lot of them in the same spot. The Louisiana Purchase, Louisiana Territory, and what eventually became Nebraska. So to do this, we need to enable time on the layer. And we do this, like most things, in the layer properties. So either double-click or right-click and choose Properties. And you're just going to go all the way over to the time layer here. We want to choose Enable Time on this layer. And the default is going to come up with each feature has a single time field. That's not true here. If you remember from the attribute table, we have a start and end date. So we want to choose each feature has a start and end time field. Now, it's smart enough to figure that out, that start date is the start time field and end date is the end time field. But we do want to do a couple of other things. In this case, it is a date time field. It's stored as a date time object. But if you just had a year or something like that, you might set it in there if it was different. The time step interval, we don't want to do hours. Go ahead and hit calculate. We actually don't even want to do 12 years. We want to see what's going on for each year. So just go ahead and choose this to manually change that to be 1 year. That'll give us a nice smooth transition. Now go ahead and hit OK. And what you'll probably notice is, like a lot of things in ArcGIS, not much has changed right away. So the first thing we want to do, the next thing we want to do to make sure that we're enabling time, is we're actually able to visualize the time, is go up here in your main sort of toolbar and choose this time slider button. Just click on that. And that'll bring up a new window for you that has basically each year as a record, and you can sort of drag it around and see what things might have looked like during a particular year. You can also just simply let it play, sort of like a movie. I've already kind of gotten past the point where a lot of things change, though you see a few things sort of popping in and out, Hawaii arriving, stuff like that. We do have a lot of other settings that we can do with this. We can either turn on and off time on the time slider here. So this will just simply disable it and then re-enable it. So it lets you see the whole layer right with one click. We also have some options that we can do. We can set what the time step interval is. In this case, it's just taking it from that one layer. If we had multiple layers with multiple time steps, we could do that in here. We can set what the date format looks like. We might just want to have it be year, in this case, since it doesn't really matter what month it is, since we only have data at about once a year. We can have the time actually appear on the map as well. We could change the extent. So if we were less worried about coming all the way up to 2015, we could do that. This is just the last time that this layer was updated. So if I wanted to do this as 1960 or something, around the last time that something changes, we could change it there. And if we wanted to change how fast things were moving, we could do that in the playback section. But just go ahead and, having changed a few things in the time display, let's hit OK. And you'll notice that the time has appeared up there. And it'll change automatically along with everything else. Now the last thing that we can do is we can render a movie. This does take up a lot of memory. It will run slowly, and you probably don't want to open any windows on top of it, or your email might show up in the middle of the video. So just be careful with that. We'll work with one of these towards the end of the demonstration. So let's look at another example. So this is one where we have polygons that appear and disappear depending on particular points. But let's look at one other example here. So I'm just going to add in Indiana Public Schools. And then I'm going to zoom to layer on that. So in this case, time has not been enabled yet on our layer. I'm going to turn off my historical states. And when I open up the attribute table, what you have is for each public school in Indiana, we have, for the records where that exist, we have the year that it was built, in addition to a lot of other sort of information about that school. Obviously, not all of these 2,656 schools have a year that they were built. And the first thing we might want to do is exclude the ones that don't, so that we can have just the ones that have a year built, and then we can begin to visualize that in time as well. So let's right-click, go into our properties. We're going to go over to the Definition Query tab. And just like we would do a selection, we're going to click Query Builder. And we're interested in only those things where the year built does not equal 0. So only those ones where it's something other than 0. So it's only, if it doesn't pass this thing, we're not going to see it. So the ones where it is 0 are going to disappear. So go ahead and hit OK. So now you see there's not a lot of them left. We have in our attribute table 157. But it was quite easy now to go back into Public Schools layer, go over to time, enable time. We're going to choose year built. Let's leave it at 1 year. And in this case, we want to display the data cumulatively. So we want those things to show up and stick around. If we left this off, they would only appear during the year that they had shown up. So go ahead and choose display data cumulatively. Hit OK. And now if we bring back up our time slider, as we move along here, the schools that are from those particular years, they appear and they stick around. So it's when they were built. If we had the destruction date, if we're the closing date or something like that, we could have that in there as well. But all of these should be ones that are still modern schools. So that's another example of bringing in some of these temporal data, and particularly for ones where we want to be able to see something appear and stay. Now let's look at one last thing, and that is how to do this with raster data. Now raster data are a lot harder to do temporally because you might have a few different slices of time from a satellite image or something. But there are some sources where we have raster data that are taken once a day, once a year, or something like that. And these are very frequently environmental data. So we're going to go ahead and look at one of these as an example. So go ahead and just start a new map document. It's just going to be easier if we don't have all this pre-existing stuff in there. And the first thing we want to do once we've started this new map document, you could save changes if you wanted to, is we're going to add in the U.S. border. This is just something I have in there so you can see where you are, so you can have an idea of where you're located on these layers when they get brought in. So go ahead and add that in. And let's just make it hollow I'm going to make my border nice and red and a little bit thicker. Now the first thing we have to do is create a link to that netcdf file. And we do that in our Arc toolbox. So choose Arc toolbox. And what we're looking for is multi-dimension tools here. So choose multi-dimension. And we want to choose Make netcdf Raster Layer. Now our input netcdf file is this precipitation monthly mean that I gave you. This is the monthly mean precipitation for the entire world. Hit open. You can really just leave everything else as the default. So just go ahead and hit OK. It'll run for a moment in the background. It's going to create a new layer file. It's not creating a new file anywhere. It's just creating a new layer over here for us to be able to use. It sort of links the netcdf file to the map document that we're dealing with. So this is not a raster data type that's natively supported by ArcGIS. So once it comes up, you'll see that what we have is, I'm just going to close the toolbox so we have a little bit more room to move around. If we zoom in and out, this is worldwide. It goes all the way around the Earth. But we're just going to sort of focus on the US part here. Now, right now, it's just showing us one slice in here. And in fact, it's not a particularly useful one until we begin to enable the time on here. So let's go ahead and double click on it to go into the layer properties. We're going to go over to the time section and choose enable time on this layer. The time dimension is, in this case it's saying layer has a time dimension, and our time dimension is time. Go ahead and calculate your time step interval. It's going to come up with every 2 years. Let's change it to every 2 months. We have monthly data in here, so we may as well see them sort of as they come. Now go ahead and hit OK. And when we bring up our time slider again, now we can begin to move things around and see what the climatic conditions, what the rainfall looked like at a particular time. We can also just simply hit play and watch it kind of run across. It'll come more slowly and more speedily as it's sort of rendering. Now we can do multiple things at the same time as well. We could, with this raster data in here, we could add in a vector layer that happens to have time data and see what it looks like. So let's go ahead and choose Add Data here again. And I've also given you this US fires one here. This is a record of forest fires and wildfires in the US from about the same time interval. So if you open up the attribute table, what you'll notice is that you have a start date here for the fire. So you have a time that it started. So we can use that. If we go back over to time, enable it, it comes in the start date already. I'm going to do the time step interval as every, well, we'll do 2 months again, just so that it matches the other one. And just for ease here, I'm going to choose display data cumulatively. This isn't actually accurate. Fires don't stick around once they're there. But it will give us a little bit better idea of what's going on, and then we can turn it off if we want to see things a little bit more detailed. And this is just simply because it can be hard to catch the individual times that the fires appear. They don't tend to, there's maybe one of them a month or something like that. But as you can see, they start appearing. They do tend to be associated with lower rainfall times, and then they sort of generally kind of come in like this. Now if we do go back in and turn off that display data cumulatively, it'll still work. Everything should work just fine. But actually catching when you have a fire that appears with one doesn't actually show up particularly well. So the easiest way to fix this is to go into the time slider properties here and change this time window to be every 2 months as well. So what this is doing is it's going to average things out. If something occurs within those 2 months, even if that one date time that shows up doesn't catch it, it'll still appear. So now we should be able to see more commonly some of them appearing sort of averaged out across those 2 months. Now the very, very last thing I want to do here is I want to show you how to render a video. And that's using this third button here. So I'm just going to stop this guy. And when I do this, it's going to first ask me what I want to export it as. Unfortunately, the only thing you can do is export it as an AVI, unless you wanted to do sequential images and build your own video out of them. I'm just going to send mine to the same folder that I have been working in, which for me is my N drive in my GIS folder, Demo 8. And I'm just going to call it Fire Climate. So it's going to first ask me what I want to send it out as, what compressor. Just leave these as defaults. And then it's going to run for a little while in the background. In this case, it's going to run probably for a few minutes as it's doing this. And this is the situation where I talked about before. You probably don't want to bring in another file. You probably don't want to open up your email while this is going. Just leave it going as it is. Otherwise, you might get an inadvertent screenshot of your email halfway through the video that you upload to the course site. So once it's finished running, we will have that video. We'll be able to display it however you want. You could bring it up on the internet. You could make really anything out of it. I didn't put it in this time, but we also could have had the year, the month, the time showing up on there using those same tools in the time slider that we worked with before. So while this is finishing, let me just say that this kind of concludes what I want to talk about with temporal data in ArcGIS. Again, I encourage you to play around with it a little bit, experiment with building your own temporal layers. The National Historic GIS Database and a few other websites have very, very good records of this. Of different types of temporal data, and other countries may have good things as well. So let's just go ahead and look at our fire climate. You can see that it made kind of a large video, and it's running across just about as well as you would expect. We have a nice video of it. It runs pretty well. If you slowed it down a little, you could probably see the relationship between forest fires and climatic conditions in a little bit more detail. So thank you very much. Feel free to email me with any questions, and have a good day.